welcome to another episode of Scuttlebutt. I'm Nick. I'm here with Vic, who's not on mic, William.
Howdy.
And we have our special guest today. We got Elize McKelvey.
Hello.
And we've got Kris Battles.
Hello.
Artists from the
Combat artist.
Combat Art. I just pulled a blank on the museum. The
National Museum of the
across
Marine
street.
Corps. Exactly.
We have many names.
Combat artists. So before we get into what exactly combat art is, we're going to kind of just, so people who don't know, we'll just kind of run through you guys' background. So who wants to take it first? Elize was going to take it first.
Nice.
All right, Elize, how did we get here today?
Well, that is quite the adventure. How did I get to the combat art program specifically, or here in life?
Yes. I mean, it's an open question.
Yeah.
Let's start with how'd you get to combat art, and then if the conversation takes us there, we can find the existential points of life.
Well, I've always been an artist since I was young, and I ended up going to art school at the Art Institute of Boston. In my sophomore year of college, I took a art history class called The History of Illustration, and it brought up combat art. And I was like, what is combat art? I've never heard of this. And I instantly go home and start researching it, and Kris Battles' names comes up, Mike Fay, all these artists that were in the program, and I start calling them and emailing them like, this is really intriguing to me. I've never heard about this. I need to know more. Some people say it's like a calling, right, Kris? Like everyone in the program sort of.
I think it is, yeah, definitely.
And so that kind of led me to deciding I wanted to be in the Marine Corps, Marine first, artist second, as we like to say. And fast forward 8.5 years, and I'm in the program.
All right, that is extreme Cliff's Notes. We're used to like
I know.
meandering like 20-minute stories of how we got here. Okay,
Well,
so let's dig in a little bit.
There's so many side paths along the way, but
So you said
that's the Cliff Notes version.
Yeah, you said combat artists really spoke out. So, like, what about it specifically?
For me, it was the fact that there were artists on the front lines. So in the Marine Corps Combat Art Program, we are heavy on Marines viewing what's going on in the Marines, telling the Marine Corps story. We do have civilian artists come in who never served in the Marine Corps who we trust as individuals, but for the most part, it's that Marine first-person perspective that's in our collection. And that was very intriguing for me, and because I didn't grow up in a military family, right? So it was the storytelling aspect of it. It was just all of it was very interesting and new.
So as you're hearing about combat art for the first time in your life, you're like, oh, this is a thing?
Yeah.
Like, what was the next step from there? Like, you're discovering combat art, you're doing your research, you're like, okay, do all the branches have combat art? How did you find the Marine Corps?
Right. All the branches do have some form of an art program, but the Marine Corps, of course, we're the best branch, right? So we have to do it better. And I think to join the Marine Corps, you already have to have some sense of wanting to be the best at whatever it is that you're doing. Not that there's anything wrong with the other branches. They have some amazing artwork in their collection as well. But for me personally, because I'm more than an artist, right? I ran cross country in college. I did all these things that you don't already fit that like artistic stereotype. And it just made sense for me to join the Marine Corps.
So you're already an athlete then. You got in the Marine Corps. So you don't get to be an artist as your MOS first, right? So what MOS were you in?
I was, at the time it was called Combat Camera.
Yeah.
So like graphic design, print production, photography, and then now it's called Comstrat. So they took all those and merged them into one job, which, you know, it's very similar to the combat art mission in terms of wanting to share our story with the public. But the combat art program, there's no filters on what you're drawing. So it's very raw.
And what were some of your most memorable tours?
Most memorable tours. Oh, we're like skimming through all of it now.
I mean, we're used to, okay, so just a little bit of groundwork for you. Most of the time we get someone on the other end of the mic there, they're like, we have to slow them down a little bit.
Tell them sea stories.
They're like, man, I've never wanted to tell my story of my life more than right now. And you got done in like 45 seconds, so now we're kind of scrambling a little bit.
Well, I guess I was just trying to introduce myself in the quickest way possible, because there's Kris over here as well. And I think in terms of the art program, there's like this lineage of artists. There's only been 358 of us, officially?
Good question. I'm number
300.
357.
You're
There's more after me.
357.
Yeah.
So there hasn't been a lot of us, and our program's been around since 1942. We're going to hit our 80th anniversary next year, which is very exciting. So when you're in the program, it's like it's all of us, and we're all part of sharing this one story. So for me personally, it's always really hard to like narrow in on what I'm doing, because I'm supposed to be the one behind the sketchbook, right?
Mm-hmm.
Telling stories of other people. And when you get a combat artist in this hot seat, it's like, oh, now we actually have to talk about ourselves and like how we got here and our journeys. Like, now I'm supposed to tell your story, not my story. That's kind of, I think, why we are the way we are. But so my most memorable deployments, well, I did one deployment with the 15th Marine Expeditionary Unit in 2015. That was technically my only deployment in the Marine Corps, and it was a year long. I wasn't even in the combat art program yet, so everything I was doing was kind of on the side, doing my own thing. And
Yeah, but you were unofficially a part of the program. We knew
Yeah.
we wanted you to be. We were like, yes, you know.
yeah, at this
So,
point, everybody
yeah.
knew who I was. 'Cause like
Yeah.
I said before, when I was in college, I was calling all these people asking how I get into this program. They're like, oh, keep working, practice some anatomy, learn how to draw people moving. You'll get there someday. And then at some point, our program sort of lost funding for a little while because they were building up the museum, beautiful museum. And so there was no opportunity officially. And then 2015, I deployed. And then in 2016, the funding came back for the program. And that's when Charlie Groh, the deputy director at the time, was like, hey, you want to be a part of the Combat Arts program now? And it's still not a primary job, but basically all that changed was now I had like an official drive to keep doing this, because before it was just on my free time and weekends. Didn't have much of a life, I guess, besides drawing. But
Drawing is life.
drawing
Yeah.
is life. And I mean, that's how you get better. You just keep drawing. I shouldn't say that. I did have a life, but like, you know, I
but
did
an
draw
artist's
a
life.
lot.
Yeah, that is the artist's life.
I mean, yeah, I
Quite
run
often.
marathons and stuff too, so it's not like I
Yeesh.
wasn't doing. I was doing other things, like in marathon.
By the way, she could do 20 pull-ups when she was on active duty, didn't
Could.
you? Yes.
Yeah, that comes from that stubborn like Marine Corps mentality, and for like before females had to do pull-ups, I was like, oh, I think I can do pull-ups because I just want to show that I can do
Yeah.
them, and so I started training them, and it took I think 1 year to get one pull-up, but then it was like a snowball effect after that. I was able to get more of them. And now I'm almost back to that.
That's
I've been
good.
hitting the gym a lot lately.
I've been doing pull-ups too, but I'm not going to tell you how many I'm
Yeah,
doing
you should.
right now.
Should
Yeah.
pull
I'm
ups
working
and
on it.
draw at the same time.
Yeah, with one arm pull-ups with a sketchbook and a pencil.
Yeah.
I
We're just
do-
training for art missions here.
You never know when that skill will come in handy.
I know, right?
Absolutely.
I know I'm getting sidetracked on the deployment part, but that was the one deployment. And then when I was in the art program, I was able to do some missions solely for the art program, and I went to Iraq for a little bit, and then a bunch of training ops throughout, like 29 Palms, Quantico, and then recently we covered the refugees on Quantico as well, and then I just came back from a trip at Bogue Air Base with the Marines out there for a few days, and it was good.
All right. Before we get too much into the weeds about the actual combat art, Kris, can you give us a
Yes.
rundown of how you got
Well,
to combat art?
Longer than 45 seconds.
Well, exactly. Well, it's the same in a way. It's about networking, and it's about personality, because we're a very small group. You know, across the services, there's not a lot of people. It's hard to find somebody who wants to be or is an artist who's qualified to do art and also is capable of deploying. It's hard to find that mentality together and just the skill set. So it's a small world. So I was working down in Florida doing portraits and landscapes, that sort of thing. I was out of my previous enlistment. I'd been a Marine Corps reservist for 10 years. And then I saw this blog talking about this warrant officer, Mike Fay, who was in Iraq at the time. And my mind was blown. And because I had remembered seeing, Colonel Waterhouse's work all throughout wherever I was in the Marine Corps. And so I had heard about Marine Corps art, but I didn't know that they had the job again or whatever. So I emailed him and said, "This is great, good job, this is wonderful." And he had been a recruiter in the past, an award-winning recruiter, and so he sort of started reeling me in, fishing, and said, "Well, hey, can I see your work? You're a prior Marine, hmm?" And then so he said, "Would you be willing to talk to us here at the History Division, and also to talk to the Deputy Director, Charlie Grow?" So one thing leads to another. I asked the wife. She's like, "Okay." And by golly, the next thing I know, at 38 years old, I'm re-enlisting in the Marine Corps. And within 2 months, I'm in Iraq on my first combat art deployment.
So you've been in the Marines and didn't know about the combat art?
Well, I didn't know that there was any such program. I'd seen it, right? And I think at that time there still was the Illustrator MOS, but my recruiter didn't tell me about that.
Oh, of course.
Back in the day, yeah. But I didn't know that they were actually doing it again until I saw Mike Fay on that blog.
What's the re-enlistment process like for coming in the Marine Corps at 38 years old again?
Well, I had such flashbacks because I had to go to the MEPS station, and so all the physical, all that stuff was the same as standing in line, swearing an oath, all that stuff.
I can't imagine it.
It was
being
crazy.
Only being out a year and going back. And
Right.
doing all that.
I had a decade out, yeah. And everyone's kind of looking at me funny, like, who's this old? And they let me, I was a sergeant again, so that was good. I didn't have to come back in at like a lance corporal or something. That would be bad. Because it's hard enough being a 38-year-old sergeant, much less a lower rank than that. But the whole processing was the same, just like when I was just out of high school. And so it was 20 years, 1 month, and 1 day after I originally enlisted, I re-enlisted.
That was 2012.
No, I was 2006 when I re-enlisted, and then I, late June, re-enlisted. August was brought up on RCT orders just to get familiar with the uniforms, go out to the rifle range again, and then in September of 2006, I was mobilized, and then in October, I was in Iraq on a short-term deployment.
And you were deployed, so...
Month and a half, 2 months, something like that.
Yeah.
They don't send the artists over for very long, which is great, by the way, because, I mean, it sounds prima donna-ish, like, we don't want to ruin your mojo, so, they'll send over the artists and the historians as well for a shorter term, just because your productivity and they want to get you back and working as quick as they can on the bigger fine art stuff.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, and then so that was your 2011?
2006 and 7.
Yeah.
Then I went back to Iraq for another month and a half in 2007 with the Osprey Squadron.
Okay.
And then I went to, all over for training. I went to Haiti in 2010. I went to Afghanistan in 2009. So anyway, all over the place. Whenever they had an emergency, like the earthquake in Haiti and then the hurricane in the Philippines. So I was sketching after that too.
Whenever their story needed to be told.
Basically, boom, yeah.
Yeah, and there was a point there where I don't know if it was true or not, where I saw a story that you were the only combat artist.
I was for a while, yeah. See,
Yeah.
so when One Officer Fay retired, I was sort of the last vestigial artist.
Yeah.
And the Navy had, at the time, they had a civilian and a Navy reservist. So it was shrinking. The whole combat art world was shrinking. And the Air Force they had just closed down their program, I think, by then.
You know
Anyway.
why that was shrinking down?
It's just an old. So after Vietnam, the MOS kind of went away, and I just think it's just a matter of being in the minds of the people who are making MOSs and that sort of thing, and it just sort of slowly kind of was out of focus and out of. It just didn't maintain its. What do you call it?
Prestige.
Yeah, and so it just maybe it wasn't seen as necessary. Or too old school. Because even in 1942, they were asking the question, why do you need artists instead of photographers?
Very common question.
Right, and it still is like the question you get.
Well, that's going to be the next question we ask. So not to put your profession under like the scope, but why does the Marine Corps or any service need combat artists or an artist in residence program? What's your pitch?
Well, I go first.
Go for it.
For me, I always say, like, why limit the way that you share a story? I mean, there's a reason we still have museums today and videos and stories and news. Like, they're all telling stories in their own way, and art does the same thing. There's also something about, at least for myself, going out and being on a deployment where my sole purpose was photography. I remember distinctly I was attached to 3-1, an infantry unit, and the whole idea was I was integrating with them as much as I could, and it took 4 months or so for me to for them to get used to me. And I think it was because I was taking photos and there was a barrier between me and them. But the minute I took out my sketchbook and started drawing, all of a sudden everyone comes around me and they're like, "Oh, what are you doing? What is that? That's so cool." And it's an engaging sort of activity.
Interesting.
And there's something about like being drawn or like somebody taking the time to illustrate your story, whether you're on a security post or a mess deck marine or something that you might not think is very exciting, but is actually very important to our mission and to the whole mission of the Marine Corps. And the general public wants to see those stories. Yeah. And art has a way of putting emotion into that maybe a photo can't.
There's an investment of time in there, right? Like
That's
you can't
exactly
like
it.
if you're walking through a mess hall, you don't even have to stop walking.
Right,
You just
yeah,
snap
you
the
get
picture
the
and keep
photos.
going.
All right, I hit what
Yeah.
the mission that I came out here for was to capture this moment with my camera. But, art is like watching paint dry. I mean, it's a slow process.
Sometimes literally.
Sometimes literally. But we do take our cameras with us. Like there are moments where things are moving so quick that we try and get sketches in as much as we can, but we have to take photos. So we'll take those photos and those sketches and go back to our studio afterwards and create like final larger paintings. But another reason with art is you can take different moments of a larger sequence of events and combine them into one story on one page, where with a photo, it's what you take is what you get.
Right. Yeah, we can compress time. We can take multiple narratives. We can also cut out extra stuff. Sometimes a picture, it just tells everything, and there may be extraneous things in the way in the photograph or whatever, but we can say, well, that's not really necessary to the story. And so we're telling the truth. I think it was Picasso who said art is the lie that tells the truth. So we're constructing this narrative visually to tell the truth without all the other stuff that sometimes a photograph will have in it that can get in the way.
Well, hey, along those lines then, and I really appreciate what you had to say about telling stories, because that's something that was the impetus behind this podcast, is the idea that, stories matter, and we're all about storytelling and narrative. But in literary art, you have the benefit of being able to use time isn't a restriction. I've got page space, I've got the written word, and I can take the time to develop and really craft and shape the environment. So regardless of the genre, whether it's short story, long form fiction, flash fiction, there's still an element of scene setting, character development, and those are the things that bring people to the story. So then the narrative, then you're able to play out the whole free tags pyramid thing. But it seems to me that for visual art, you maybe are a little more restricted in that sense, in that even when you have that ability to sort of combine things and show, it is still a frozen frame. Time isn't this, so you have to make time your friend, because sort of inherently it's not.
Right.
Because all of that context is really outside of the frame, if you will.
You're right. So if I may,
please.
It's like in a story, you're using your words and guiding us through, and we're walking down this path, and you're giving us information, and we're going along with
I'm
it.
able to control the pace.
Right. And so we're stuck in this two-dimensional frame. But we can still guide the viewer around it. We can still put those things in there, and we can do things with time. But you're right. We're still restricted, but we can expand it a bit. Or, like I did the big painting I did was 10 feet wide and 6 feet tall. It's about the 24th MEU, and it's on the USS Bataan, or Bataan as they say nowadays. And so there's an aircraft taking off, and there's some blue jerseyed chainsmen running along the deck. And I've compressed time a bit in the image, and so in reality, the blue jerseyed chainsman would be going on about 60 seconds or something after that one Osprey's far enough out, and then he'd call him over. So, I've compressed it in the image, but I am much more restricted than a writer
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess in that sense, then, and to juxtapose it with a photo, when I see a photograph, I'm not being invited into that world. I'm just viewing a moment in time, and maybe it's because of the medium is so. I mean, it is literally a snapshot.
Right.
Whereas art is creative and it's generated, and like you said, it takes time, and so I think there's just. I don't know if it's just the way our brains are programmed or because we're visual creatures, but we're much more invited into that world to sit and be and partake in that experience. So, like, what techniques then do you guys use that sort of bridges or that makes that time restriction no longer a restriction?
Well, for me, a lot of my influence right now comes from another artist in our program. His name is Victor Yuhas, and he was a really well-known, or is still a really well-known courtroom sketch artist and political cartoonist, and he's done so much work for our program. And his ability to capture movement and Marines running. You could have a Marine run across for 3 seconds, and somehow you'll look back and he'll have a full drawing of this Marine running in his sketchbook, and he's able to capture, and it looks like he's running. There's some movement in his line work that kind of gives the sense that you're watching something moving even though it's still. And like for me, I don't use an eraser that much. I'll draw in Prisma-colored pencil, which doesn't erase, so you can see all the lines. You'll see that first initial line and then all the 10 lines after it to make that final image, and it gives a sense that this figure is moving through the paper even though he's really not moving at all. It's like animation almost, but flattened.
Well, we use narrative. We're usually not just abstract painters and that sort of thing. There's a
Right.
few abstract. So we're realists generally and naturalists, sort of like old school,
Academic.
pre-modern. We're
Yeah.
academic painters in a way, but we're our narrative painters. So we do take sort of archetypical settings. So when I'm out looking for images, I'm drawing every Marine, like every man or whatever they used to say, every Marine. So I'm drawing and trying to find images that are timeless, human, people can relate to. So I've got an image I did for the Navy called Exo's Inquiry, and it's these guys in their Navy whites in this passageway on the USS Ronald Reagan, and they're just sort of sitting there. And I started sketching these individuals when I was on the ship, and chatting with them and getting their names and that sort of thing, writing it in the captions of the sketch, and then taking a bunch of pictures because I was so interested in their uniforms, because you never see the white uniforms rarely in this era of blue coveralls and whatever that green camouflage utility uniform is they wear nowadays. Anyway, so I was very fascinated, but I found it was a bad day for them. They're in trouble. They're sitting in the passageway waiting to go to the executive officer's office and be judged to see if they're going to be either court-martialed or reprimanded. So it's like going to the principal's office for them. But it makes a very interesting image because it's a part of Navy life, and we do this with the Marines as well. It's a part of their life that may or may not be considered, for lack of a better word, sexy. It's not the great thing that gets recruiters excited to get people in, right? But it's important, and it's daily life. And so I see people that have come in and seen that image, and they know exactly what it is, and they relate to it. Even if they served in the 60s, it's still something that's timeless. And so we're looking for those narratives and those scenes that can have multiple stories in them. And you're just showing perhaps an interaction between two figures or three, or a figure and a piece of equipment, something. So Charlie Grow told me when I first re-enlisted to try to find contrasts, old versus young, new versus old, that sort of thing. Find these contrasts, because in that you're going to find a story. And he also told me to draw a lot of hands and faces to practice. Anyway, so
yeah, for sure.
There's a technical side too.
Like, obviously, being able to, I think you get a lot of context by what the emotion that people wear on their sleeves, right?
Absolutely. Mm-hmm. Yeah, by rendering the emotion or the narrative that's happening, and focusing on that, whatever way you do that stylistically, and whatever you do to that picture plane, whatever you put in and whatever you keep out, you're doing that to tell as best you can, as much as you can, so that it'll draw the viewer in.
Yeah.
And keep them there, and then they'll walk away with something.
I think for me it was so frustrating because I had such this innate passion to want to share stories and be a part of this program, but my skills just weren't there yet. And I mean, I'm still getting better, obviously. Everybody's always improving, and if you're not improving as an artist or you're getting complacent, then humble yourself, because there's always ways to improve. But I would see how Kris and Mike Fay and all these artists were able to render these moments in time, and I was like, dang, I just want to get to that level. Like, I have these stories that I want to share, but my skills aren't there yet.
It's like they say, how do you get to Carnegie Hall, man? Practice, man. Practice.
I'm trying to capture time, but also it takes time to get better so that you can capture time.
Well, so these are great tools, but I could have all the right tools in the world in a block of wood and everything, but it doesn't necessarily I'm going to make a chair, right? Like, so there's obviously that artistic aspect of it. So where do you feel then that, like, where does the art, or where does the narrative direct the art, and where does the art direct the narrative? So when you find
I don't know
that
if you ever
sort of
got that question.
It's a very good question. Because it's both important, because I remember as a young Marine standing outside in the passageway getting ready for medical or somewhere and looking up at Colonel Waterhouse's work and being incredibly inspired by the message. And
you
then
just stare at it for like 15
so
minutes.
that narrative influenced me and influenced my narrative, in a sense, my life, right? So it directed me in a way.
Yeah.
And then eventually I became an artist because of what I saw. It also just helped me as a Marine. So it did. That story that he told me the story, helped me, and then I was able to, it somehow impacted my story. So let's see if I remember the question correctly. How did the narrative affect?
Yeah, so as the artist, so like, say you're looking at these the sailors sitting in the passageway waiting on to potentially get NJP'd or
right,
get
exactly.
Do you look at it and go, "There's a story here," and then you start drawing, or do you start the art and then go, "Oh, here's the story now"? Because I know as a writer, I may have like some scaffolding, but sure as shit, as soon as I start writing, I'm gonna be like, this story is directing me in this other direction. If I don't follow it, I'm going to end up scrapping 100 pages and having to start all over again.
Well, we have a similar thing with sketches, and I don't know if it was Mike Fay that said we're the poetry, or the art is the poetry, and instead of the prose. Anyway, but those sketches are a way of working that issue out in a way, and they not only capture a moment, and they're very powerful if they work. But it helps you then to see the thing that also what's very important about a combat artist is when you're on a deployment or wherever you are, you got to keep your head on a swivel and you're watching. That's what you're constantly looking, and that's another talent you have to have. You have to be open to seeing it, because it's going to hit you over the head. Mm-hmm. If you're doing your part, like you say, if you're writing, if you got the outline, it may guide you in a certain way, right? And you have to follow that. So I've been in situations where I know kind of what I'm looking for, and I go out on the patrol or wherever it is. And then suddenly something happens or whatever, then you, of course, can see it and you're doing it. So part of it is just being ready and developing your skills, and then being open to seeing it.
Yeah, I mean, the whole thing with our art collection is it's a collection of art that shows moments throughout Marine Corps history. So if there is a gap in our collection because we didn't have an artist out there at that time, we will get a general narrative of like, hey, make sure you capture the tanks,
right,
for instance.
Can we go further on that? Can you just explain briefly just like the history of the combat art program for the Marine Corps?
So 1942, there was a need for the general public to know what was happening on the front lines. And General Denig at the time, who was the in charge of public affairs, brought on these artists to go out and capture these moments, because photography wasn't as strong back then, and there still was a need for art renditions. And So between the photographers, the artists, the videographers, and the public affairs.
It was the Division of Public Relations that all of that sprang
Chris,
out of.
Chris, you're covering up your microphone.
Sorry about
If you just bring it up, then you can touch your chin again. There you go.
I feel like I'm in a science fiction movie. Dun, dun, dun.
So-
I can see your audio again.
Oh, that's interesting.
This is you on the bottom down here. You're the quietest one in the room. But don't worry. Don't worry.
Wow. Anyway,
So,
the technology
yeah.
is amazing.
Amazing.
You're alive here.
Yeah.
It looks like
It's
one
like
of
an
those.
EKG,
Yeah,
yeah.
EKG.
Dun, dun, dun,
Yeah,
dun.
but you knocked your microphone back earlier, and you were still getting picked up, but then when you were touching your chin just there,
Interesting.
completely blocked your
Good
microphone.
job, Chris.
So I could say something.
That'll be edited.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm going to chunk I'm gonna
Oh.
chunk
Darn.
Oh,
that. Or
nice.
leave it in because it's
What was it?
interesting.
Leave it in. Leave
so,
it in.
So General Denig came off of retirement and was called to be the chief of the newly forming Division of Public Relations. So all of
Whom they
the-
called Denig's Demons.
Yeah, Denig's Demons. And so his whole viewpoint or vision was to bring in artists, journalists, photographers, and that sort of thing, and do the whole thing. So they valued having the artistic part as well as the photographic part. But we were all under the same tent.
Yep.
And then later, of course, public relations went off one direction, or public affairs, and then you had comic camera. And the art was its own thing for a while. But then we've forgotten that we had a place.
Well, the mission of the art program, and it still is today, was go to war, do art. That's simply put. Go to whatever situation. Doesn't have to be war anymore, but same concept. Go there, make art, come back, and share it with the public. Give them a viewpoint into the life of the Marine Corps that they might never ever get to see.
So when you are, sorry to kind of jump back like 5 minutes before we got into the history of it. When you are capturing the stories, like you're in there by your own mission, you're not there for very long. You're in there, you're capturing as much as you can, your head's on a swivel, notes, pictures, sketches. How do you keep that all in mind when you get back stateside or get back to wherever you're trying to get to be able to kind of parse through this mountain of information
Right.
you have and choose what stories need to get told?
I think, well, for one, we try and create work as close to the actual event as we can. So I remember when we were in Iraq, it was me, Kris, no, you weren't there. It was
Richard.
me, Richard Johnson, Victor Yuhas, and
CJ.
Captain CJ Bauman, who's an officer in the Marine Corps still, a combat artist. And we went out on a mission during the daytime, drew as much as we could, and then come back at night and create these final drawings, even if it meant we were up till 4 or 5 a.m. And then we go back out the next day, capture as much as we can again, come back in the evening and create more artwork. And then everything, and then we would show the commands while we were out there, like, hey, look, we're actually like doing something that is kind of cool and tells your story, and it gets them excited, and then it opens up more opportunities. If we were there another week, they went, okay, come on out with us on this thing. Come over here, do this. We ended up going out the Navy SEALs for a day where the first time we met them, they didn't want anything to do with us. Don't draw us. Don't look at us. And the next thing you know, we're hanging out in their like not barrack, I don't know what it was really, their tent, and we're out on some random mission where they're with the Iraqis. And
Well, I mean, who else is going to do the cover art for all the books they read?
right,
Like, all
exactly,
Right, yeah.
exactly.
In fact, if they're just
It
using
was pretty
just
funny.
glory shots of them staying next to a burned out Jeep, like,
Yep.
no offense, Andy, but like,
So ideally, we want to be there for as long as we can, because it really does take like a week or so for people to get used to us and see what we're doing, and then another week for the stuff to really open up and us go outside the wire if we can, or whatever they're doing, go on a patrol. But then everything we can't do while we're out there, we'll come back to the studio, and you're trying to do it as quick as you can. But you'll look at work 3 years down the line, or photos and sketches, and be like, oh, I didn't realize that this was going to make such a good story, and then you'll go back and create it.
And I don't know if you journal while you're doing things. I keep
You
a
get
journal as
better at
well.
it.
And when we're sketching, we try to put as much information on the sketchbook page as we can, and that varies from artist to artist.
Yeah.
We're trying to get the person involved, maybe the day, definitely where you were and what was going on.
Sometimes
the
they'll be
units you were with.
talking, and you'll write down the sentence that
Like
they
a
were
quote.
saying. Yeah.
Something interesting that will make you remember what was
Can
going
you
on.
actually like walk us through, I guess, like the lifetime or of a painting or art you produce? Like, how does it like start, and then how do you get to like eventually the finished product?
for the ones that survive, just kidding, because my wife hates the fact that I've actually destroyed, not Marine Corps work, obviously, but my own private
Marine
work.
Corps property.
Right. But there's been stuff actually that I forgot in the old studio and that ended up being in part of the collection that was just old stuff that I didn't think was finished, and they took it anyway. I'm like, what did you guys take that stuff for? That's not finished. Anyway, so it starts with the patrol or wherever you are. So you're sketching, you're talking to the person, you're taking photographs. One of my favorite paintings is the A Little Light Reading, and it's in the Marine Corps Heritage Foundation office, the front office, and you can see it at the museum. But it's a big painting, and it's of these Marines in a little forward operating base, patrol base, in Iraq. And I'd just gotten out of the improvised chow hall, which was a little Connex box or whatever you call it. And I walk out, and there's this cami netting hanging down over them. They're around this little ammo can with a little fire in it because it's cold in Iraq in November, and in the morning, and they're chatting, and I just saw the scene. I thought, I've got to capture this scene. So I got my sketchbook out. I'm sketching these guys. I'm taking a bunch of photographs, and I know that this image is something I've got to share. I've got it, right. So that's part of the deal of just being open for when serendipity sort of hits, right. And so I was just capturing as much as I could. And I've gotten several sketches out of the thing. I've gotten paintings out of it. But then it took months to realize the painting. It's a big painting. So then it's a matter of stretching the canvas and getting the composition right, and then doing little sort of figure studies and different things like that. Old school, then layers of paint and hours, dozens of hours later, voila, you have a painting. and then if it gets accessioned in the collection, then it's taken care of for a long time, hopefully.
Yeah.
And
We
then
have
it gets on the cover of Leatherneck.
Yeah, and then it comes.
if you're lucky. Yeah, you get on the cover of Leatherneck. Oh, yeah.
Self-plug. That's
Thank you for that.
Yep.
I'll pay you later.
okay, so that's all here and now stuff. So you go out, you capture, you see it, you capture as fast as possible. Now, you guys also try and do some historical stuff too, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I kind of just want to jump over to Elize here real quick because we worked a little bit with Sergeant Major Canley when he got his Medal of Honor, and I saw you did some of the artwork for him. And I think that you talked to John Legato to do like a historical.
Wow. That's funny.
Kind of walk through that?
Yeah, so this was when I was still in the Marine Corps. I got opportunities where I was able to cover like Medal of Honor recipients. One person I covered was Herschel Woody Williams, last living Medal of Honor recipient on Iwo Jima. I was able to share his story. And then another individual, Sergeant Major Canley, he was a gunnery sergeant in Vietnam during the actions that earned him the Medal of Honor. And I was able to talk to him and John Legato, who was one of the Marines that served under him and kept pushing for him to get the Medal of Honor. I think he submitted it 10 times.
Something like that. He even wrote the whole book for it.
Yeah,
so,
he wrote the whole book. He is quite the individual, very interesting. I would like to do a painting on him as well, honestly. But yeah, so the issue we ran into was we didn't have any visual representation of what he did on Vietnam besides written stories. And so I was able to interview all these people and create this image depicting the moment that earned him the Medal of Honor. And I was able to give it to him. And then I also did a digital portrait painting as him as well that we used during the ceremonies and all of that. That was pretty interesting. That's actually in the collection. Joan Thomas did take that. So it's accessioned. And yeah, that was really cool. He was so nice too. You would never think that, I don't know, if you didn't know who he was, you wouldn't know. And I remember I went to his house the night before the ceremonies for the Medal of Honor, and he invited me out there, and it was this big celebration with his family and all the Marines, and there's a cake cutting ceremony, and then throughout, I've done some mural paintings for the Marine Corps through various events, and he would come out and to the unveiling, and super nice person. But yeah, that was my historical painting, and then we have other paintings in our collection where there were gaps in our history, and we need to hire an artist or have a common artist go back through and recreate these scenes. You've done a few
Yeah.
as well.
It's a totally different animal as far as producing it is concerned. You're still worried, of course, about composition and telling the story and what to put in and what to put out, but you weren't there. So when you're a combat artist, you've seen it. It's from your personal experience. It's go to war, do art. When it's a historical illustration, then it's a matter of making sure that you tell the story accurately, dramatically if possible, but also you have to sort of please all the armchair sergeants major out there who may or may not have some information about your incorrect uniform choice or whatever. Those guys weren't
Well,
wearing that at that
actually,
time.
they actually did in this unit.
Exactly,
This is
right.
how they wore
Right.
it. But
Yeah,
they're
so you
like,
have to be
Right
very well
canteen.
researched.
Yeah.
Yeah, you have to be as if you were there. You have to find enough information to depict it as if you were there, which is a lot more difficult.
And I've sorry.
Yeah, to some extent, I mean, combat artists are historians in nature, because you can like historians answer questions of what happened, and artists, military historian or combat artist, answer question like what did it look like. And so, do you, from like your artistic background, how do you are able to balance the idea of like you're presenting historically what this is supposed to look like in all accuracy versus, I guess, like the like your artistic side, we're trying to tell a story.
That's a good question.
That's a very good question.
Well, for me, when I'm drawing on location, I mean, I'm really just trying to capture as much as I can in that moment. And I personally, I'm not really thinking about like composition. Maybe
You are subliminally.
maybe I
You know
am
you are,
like
yeah. Your artistic eye is,
subconsciously
yeah.
I am like, oh, there's like leading lines, so I'll try to position myself in an area that makes a good composition, but really I'm just trying to capture it. And then there's also situations, if there's live fire, for instance, you're not going to be able to sit in front
Right.
of the weapon and draw like this cool angle, so you're gonna get what you get. A big thing with us is we don't want to be a liability, and that's why we have uniformed Marines as combat artists, because they're able to pull out their weapon if they need to and assist in whatever is going on, which helps units. They're like, okay, they're also Marines and they know how to move with a patrol and what to do and what not to do. And then down the line we'll bring in civilian artists, and so we try and make it so it's one Marine and one civilian. The civilian artists are really good established artists that can help that Marine with their artistic abilities, but then the Marine can help them move through if they need it. So it's a nice balance.
Yeah, as far as history, telling the story. So history, as you know, is many times it's just little events that nobody thought were significant, and sometimes they knew they were significant,
Like
but it's all
tanks.
strung together. What's that?
Like tanks leaving,
Tanks, sure,
covering
yeah.
tanks.
Yeah, and so
You
you never
don't
knew,
realize
oh, gosh,
2
they're
months
gone.
later they'd be
right.
gone.
I wish we would
Yeah.
have gotten sketches, whatever. But so a good example. So Richard Johnson and Mike Fay were they were sketching for the Joe Bonham project. Kyle Carpenter.
Yes.
Just by chance, a young Kyle Carpenter, fresh back from his wounds, recovering in Walter Reed or Bethesda.
It was a little side hospital.
Okay. Would you
They had
remember where it
moved
was?
him. It was a hospital specifically for brain
There you go.
neurology.
And
I
so
don't
they
remember what it was
didn't
called.
know, and they meet him. They're sketching. They take his name down. There's several artistic renderings of Kyle Carpenter while he's recuperating. That's actually a wonderful historical record now. And he was, of course, the Medal of Honor recipient.
Yeah, nobody knew.
And
he
they didn't know at the time.
And you guys do such a good job documenting everything as you sketch stuff. That makes it easier later, right?
Right. And one of the good things about what we do is we provide a visual record. So let's say you're a writer, and all of our images are available in the public domain if you're a historian or a writer, and so we can provide a visual for the written word as well.
So when doing some of your historical work, because I've gone on and seen some of the stuff y'all have done, do you use like dummies? Do you get like actual equipment? Do you like photographs? Do you have like models go and do the things and get the angle? Like what's that process?
You've been researching. You guys have
I know,
done
it's
great
good.
homework. These guys, man, pay them more. What's going on? Anyway.
Yeah.
Whoever's
Say
listening,
that
pay
out
them more.
loud.
Pay
Pay them
them
more.
That's on record.
Yeah.
Good deal. Yeah, very good question. And we do all of that. So we try to make sure we get the right gear and equipment. There's the USMC Historical Company. Gunnery Sergeant Williams, retired, is a wonderful resource for uniforms. A lot of units will utilize their services. He's got period uniforms all the way back to the Revolution, the colonial Marine Corps. And so we literally will craft the scene. You have to, you do what's called thumbnail drawing. You craft the scene, what you'd like to show. Okay, so what am I supposed to be telling? What's the key moment in this battle or this campaign? Then you might construct the image to where it's a visual, a decent image. And then you say, okay, so now I know this has got to be the way it is. What were they wearing at the time? You give a call to the whoever's got the equipment, and they can provide living models to wear it, and you can pose them just like Norman Rockwell used to do in his studio back in the day with local people. He'd dress them up and he'd pose them, and you literally pose them, and you can take a bunch of different reference shots and different angles, and then you go from there, and it helps a ton with solving all those problems visually of where they need to be, and you're not just basically guessing.
Yeah, like when I did Sergeant Major Canley's painting, I didn't have access to that at the time, and so I had to rely on the Marines that served under him and like their depictions of what happened, and then I just tried to heavily research the rebel, Vietnam rebel. When I did the painting of Herschel Woody Williams, he was a flamethrower on Iwo Jima, and every image that came up of flamethrowers they were standing, pointed towards whatever target, and so that's how I painted him. And then I show him the painting, and he's like, "That's not right." And he was like, "Actually, we were in the prone most of the time, lying down, shooting in, because they were a pretty big target on Iwo Jima." And so I redid it with him like in the prone. But
That's cool.
Yeah, because Hollywood tells me they're standing up all the time. So.
Yeah, he crawled in.
And this gets to the question of illustration and the artistic license. There's so many excellent paintings out there from history that aren't so good at really telling it how it really was. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. It's good, and it does tell the story. Plus, so there's something called history and there's something called heritage. And I was talking to Gunny Williams. We were discussing this difference. And we love both of them in the Marine Corps. We love our history and we love our heritage. And sometimes they're not quite the same thing. And the heritage can be wonderful and glorious, as can the history, the facts. But sometimes we like the heritage, like that is the standing Marine and, the rifleman, and he's on Iwo and he's shooting and he's standing up. Well, no, probably not, right? Unless he had a death wish, right? So it's a wonderful heritage. They were brave and they were shooting, but the history was that they were getting it done in a slightly different manner.
And I feel like that's an issue especially for commercial artists who do historical and military art, just by the nature of you're on top of it, this is your job, this is how you get money, and what's gonna sell more prints.
Yep.
Right. What's the more the money shot or whatever? What's the guy standing up with the tank?
Iconic image.
Yeah. The guy with the flamethrower standing up is or pictures of Basilone. He's got the machine gun. He's yes and no. He definitely was advancing under fire with his machine gun, but he's not
not
shirtless.
A heroic pose.
Right, exactly. It wasn't this big grand heroic pose as they would have in Hollywood.
Well, it's interesting too, because when I was in the Marine Corps and my primary job was Comstrat, public affairs, stuff like that, where our whole mission was to share the story of the Marine Corps, but in the correct light, right? So if a Marine has his hands in his pockets, for instance, we couldn't release that as an official image because Marines aren't supposed to have their hands in their pockets. But with the combat art program, anything goes, and you can paint and capture the raw moments. That's what I love about our program.
Yeah, that's
it's
what's
very
great about combat
honest. Art. Yeah, there's no commercial necessarily. Now there is work in our program that's never been seen by the public because maybe it is so raw and so real that the public isn't even ready to see it yet.
So what do they do with those for the time being? Will those ever be released, or?
I'm thinking like
Some
the
of them
Vietnam.
have.
A lot of
Yeah.
some of it have.
One good that's not Marine Corps art, but the World War II Victor's mentor.
Oh,
Howard Brody. So Howard Brody had a famous image where he sketched the Germans who had infiltrated in American uniforms in the Battle of the Bulge. He got to be there when they were executed by firing squad. And he drew the after effects of that with a German soldier kneeling or leaning over, tied to the post with blood coming out the mouth. And that was one of the only images censored in the war, that the public was not allowed to see it. And so finally it was released years later, but and we have a few that probably can be releasable. It's just a matter of need or the moment. I don't know if there's a time frame on that. You know?
Yeah, I
So,
don't know, but
I don't know.
I always think like, oh, we look at work from World War II, and Marines have their uniforms in all different kinds of ways, and I don't hear Marines being like, how dare they wear their uniform like that? But Marines in current day uniforms are a little more like, oh, that's not the right way to portray it. So it just takes time, I think, to show some of the work.
Okay. And kind of looking back at some of that historical art, or not even just past artists, really, like Waterhouse, and I just drew a blank on the other name that keeps coming up.
Harvey Dunn,
Howard Brody, of course, he's in the Army. Mike Fay.
Fay.
Oh.
Keeps coming up. Sorry.
He's not history. Mike Fay is currently active.
If I had,
if you see a guy running around in a kilt, that's Mike.
Mike Fay.
if I had a
Mike.
pencil, I would have written that down. I apologize for being unprepared. But it's like Waterhouse, Fay, and some of these guys that you keep bringing up, and you look at them as like they're all out there already, right? I guess Fay's still working, but like their
Right.
artwork's out there. I'm going to use Waterhouse to segue into something else here in a minute. But so when you're looking at that, and some like especially Waterhouse, like it's very dramatic. He did a really good job picking his subjects. Like,
Sure.
would be a way of saying it, especially like the Wall of Tarawa one. So how do you look at that and like kind of translate that into what you're working on now? Like you're trying to like maintain the lineage of combat art, I guess. Is that ever even in your mind, or?
I don't think they really dictate our style necessarily, or like how we portray things, which is one thing I love about the art program. Is it really is like anything goes, but there's also a huge influence by all the artists, and one day we really need to go down and see like, oh, this artist knew this artist, and you can see their influence in their work, and it'll like trickle down the line. Like for me in my painting, I am heavily influenced by Waterhouse, and I don't know, if I never saw his work, would I be painting differently today? Probably.
Well, your Canley one has some definite
Yes,
Waterhouse.
and I did that
yeah.
specifically because Waterhouse did a lot of those historical paintings, and I wanted it to fit into like that collection if they were ever to like show it all together. And so yeah, I was heavily influenced on like the Waterhouse and how he uses color and lines and all that.
Yeah, I think Tom Lovell is another one who was a World War II artist who worked for Leatherneck, by the way, during the war. They didn't
Yeah, a lot of the
deploy him
artists
because he
worked
was
for
so
Leatherneck.
talented. They said, "Come here," and John Clymer, and so Tom Lovell and John Clymer worked for the Leatherneck and produced there's another Tarawa image, wonderful. Tom Lovell did, but he wasn't at Tarawa, but he crafted this wonderful image that is historically accurate. Relatively historically accurate and full of heritage as well.
Yeah.
And so when Colonel Waterhouse was very good about being dramatic, and so that the big Tarawa painting, it's one of my favorites. From an artistic standpoint, it's dramatic and glorious, but it's also got, he's got a part of, you can see in his process where he's splattering paint to show explosions, like yellow paint. You see the fire bursting. It's fascinating from an artistic standpoint as well. And it's so big, you enter into it practically when you're in front of it.
Yeah, like you can only share bits of it online at a time because it's, really wide.
Well, and art too. Like we went to the Philadelphia Academy of Art or Fine Arts Academy. I can't remember what the name of it is exactly. Forgive me, Philadelphia. But it's a beautiful museum, and they had the World War I exhibit that was traveling around the country and came from Britain. But anyway, the John Singer Sargent painting called Gassed was in there, and it's a World War I era painting that he had done. And not many people know that John Singer Sargent was a war artist and went over to the front lines and sketched and did wonderful watercolors. And then this big oil painting called Gassed, and it's 23 feet wide by
That's a lot of
almost
oil.
9 feet. It's huge, and it doesn't ever reproduce as well as it is when you're in front of it. You can't see the color, the texture, all the stuff. So it tells a certain story if you're in its presence, which certain things online just can't do. And that's another thing about like the Tarawa painting by Waterhouse. It's in your face, and you experience it. It's so big,
Yeah, and I'm going to use that just to kind of segue real quick. So Waterhouse was the first Marine Corps artist in residence, and you, Kris, are the second.
I'm the second official artist in residence. Yes.
And so that's a very short list, Kris.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I was very proud that they selected me to be that, because I didn't know as a young Marine that was my future.
Yeah.
I just saw this cool artwork and was angry at my recruiter that I was never an illustrator or anything else like that, right? So yeah, there's not a lot of names on that list.
Yeah.
So there's big boots to fill. So that does wear on one's psyche, I guess. No pressure. But it's an honor because not only was Colonel Waterhouse very proficient and prolific, but he was also a very nice guy. So a wonderful man who was painting all the way into his 80s, was delivering work to the collection, just cranking it out. Almost literally at the end of his life was still painting. He had a little improvised studio in his bedroom there with his daughter. He was living at his daughter and son-in-law's place before he passed away. But he was literally painting with the easels right near his bed.
Yeah.
So he was doing it right until the end.
Yeah. Something that's a little bit harder to do from your bed is sculpture.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Well, it's
we have-
technically possible.
Well, this is a really rough segue into a marine in his donkey. Was
Mule.
Oh, and his mule, yeah.
And his mule.
Well, actually, it's the title I've sort of switched around. It's actually A Mule and His Marine.
A mule in his marine.
So they knew that the Marine Corps, this is one of those instances where they wanted a specific piece. Normally they don't tell us what they want, or they'll say, we kind of need something for artillery or the tanks, or could you go get something on the chaplaincy or medical or something. So they knew they wanted a sculpture, and they knew they wanted something about the animal packing the mules, because it's a wonderful bit of history that's an anachronistic part of the Marine Corps. So I was going to go, by golly, do a sculpture of a mule and a Marine handler. So they sent me to Bridgeport. I had to enroll in the school. So in my record book to this day is a certificate saying that I passed the animal packing course, and it was in my record book that I had that secondary MOS. Is awesome. Anyway, so but I had to deal with this mule called Ozzy. Ozzy never wanted to stay in the mule train. He always wanted to kind of get up ahead, and it's kind of dangerous when you're out in the mountains with a mule, very big animal, and sometimes if he's got an independent streak, which most mules do, it can be troubling. So that's one of the reasons I titled it A Mule and His Marine, because he's kind of leading you sometimes.
Yeah, but that was a whole different medium for you.
Yeah. So Mike Fay got me started in sculpture. He had started doing sculpture, and he went to classes, and I'd always done it as a kid with modeling clay. So I'd always worked when I was a kid either sketching or doing modeling clay, but I always wanted to do, professional sculpture. Yeah. So it was a great opportunity to do it. So yeah, total different mindset. Sculpture is a totally different animal. You're dealing with composition in 3 dimensions. So your composition has to be pleasing or effective from every way you look at it. And that's totally different. So yeah.
It's something more that you can touch, but you don't get to play with color as much on it. So
Right.
how do you try and interpret? Like, you obviously now are a mule expert. So
Yes.
You have the certificate
I
and
can hitch.
everything.
I'm right. I can hitch that stuff to that mule and all that stuff. So the interesting thing about sculpture is it's tactile. Of course, painting can be this way too. Some of the great art that I like to look at has texture to it. It's not just a photograph. It's not the best paintings, I think, have texture. They're almost sculptural sometimes. But sculpture is the 3 dimensions. It is the object itself. It is the physical in your space thing. And the color isn't there, generally speaking. The Greeks actually used to paint their sculptures. We always have them classical. They're just the marble, or they're just the bronze. Maybe it's patinaed, but color isn't part of the deal. But it's wonderfully fulfilling when you're moving around the clay or the wax, and it looks like in miniature what you were wanting it to look like. Just like when you're painting that thing, wow, it looks like what I wanted it to look like. But it's just a different animal, in this case, literally an animal.
And that kind of so I'm just going through a bunch of really rough segues here at the end here. So sculpture is a very classical medium. You guys do a lot of painting, a lot of sketching. There's a lot of digital world in the future. There's a lot of VR, the metaverse or whatever. I'm getting a sense of despondence from you, Kris. Like, what do we think about the future of the combat art
He's
program?
old school.
Get off my lawn! Sorry. No, I think we definitely have to find a way to be digital. And there are some ways, I think, from a curatorial standpoint, though, I think we have to find a way to embrace that way of creating, but have something to curate at the end that isn't just digits that can disappear when the MP comes. You know what I mean? You have to have something to curate. You have to have something to show as part of your story. Artifacts, when you see, Chesty Puller's Navy Cross, the fifth one or whatever, you see, like you can see it, Dan Daly's Medal of Honor, or we have, as a matter of fact, in the museum, the sledgehammer head that was used at Harper's Ferry to get John Brown. The Marine Detachment used that to get into the building. So we have this artifact, this almost holy relic. Well, if you're just doing digital, where you're still, there is the holy relic of the story, but there's something powerful about that object or that painting, and I think this is the power of art itself over just the image itself or just the photograph. So we have to find a way to embrace the creation using digital means, but we need to have some way to translate that, I think, at least, into something that's tactile or experiential.
It's pretty interesting because when I was in the Marine Corps, my job field didn't want much traditional work as part of it. Everything had to be digital because it's more commercial, brochures, things like that. Where on the combat art side, they don't want any of my digital work. It's only traditional. So it's just an interesting juxtaposition of what you should and shouldn't do. For me, I love digital because it's really helped me become a better traditional artist in terms of color and messing around with color without having to waste supplies. The expedited nature of digital art, you can crank things out very quickly. You can animate. I've told stories through animation at this point that I think there's a place for it in the art collection. It's just, getting to that point where we figure out a way to be able to archive it. And I think that's the biggest issue is how to archive it. It's not that they necessarily don't want it in the collection, because I've done some digital paintings. Like, for instance, I did General Neller's portrait painting when I was in the Marine Corps, and it's part of the collection of the Commandant's portrait paintings. Every Commandant has this portrait done. There were no funds, or they cut the funds to have an artist traditionally paint it, so I was like, well, why don't I digitally paint it? And so I used oil painting techniques digitally so that it matched that collection, and it sits in the Pentagon as well as the home of the Commandants.
And it's a beautiful painting.
Yeah, I use the same techniques as you would traditionally. I wouldn't have been able to do that had I not had that background in traditional art at this point. So it all kind of like meshes together. But that painting itself isn't in our art collection officially because it is digital. So it's just, I don't think there really is an answer except that we're just not there yet. And, the military tends to be behind on the times in a lot of ways.
It's a glorious anachronism.
So maybe 10 years from now we'll have a way.
There are some Richard Johnson, one of our civilian artists, he has a wonderful little sort of sketch pad that digitally records where his pen moves. So as he puts pen to paper, he records with the pen and ink. He has a drawing to show, but it also records digitally where the pen went, and he can download that. And you can see exactly how his image, and you can watch it appear in real time. That's a wonderful.
It's amazing.
Way to do both.
It's
That's a wonderful compromise between digital and old school analog.
Yeah, you just kind of have to show. I've found that, like, in my career, going back to the portrait painting as well, you just have to, like, do it. People might not understand it. I had to somehow convince the Commandant and all these generals that this would work. The only way to tell them, I could tell them all day, I just had to do it and show them that, like, it was going to work. So you have to be kind of stubborn in a sense, and just keep doing it. Like, just because somebody says, like, oh, we're not accepting that yet, shouldn't stop you from still doing it and creating. And hopefully one day down the line there will be a way that it can be accessioned or looked at to be a part of the historical recollection.
Okay, so who chooses what art gets accessioned?
It's like a group. We have a curator.
It's curators.
But I would say it's like a panel, right?
Yeah, it's
for
a
the
panel
most
of
part.
The art curator and several other curators get together and look at all the work and see where it fits in the collection, how it is artistically, etc.
And it does come down to, what whoever's looking at it likes, right? So there is a human element to it that just depends on who's looking at it, whether they
Right.
think it would fit or not, which isn't right or wrong. But also another reason to hold on to things, because maybe at this time it doesn't seem like it would fit, but down the line
Right.
maybe it would work. So
Yep.
Okay. You got anything, William? He had a bunch of
Should we-
history questions
yeah,
he
we-
wanted to check off his list. So.
No, pretty much covered all of them. Actually, maybe one lingering one. Have you? So again, going back to historical questions. Have you actually? So we mentioned you use models with the uniform equipment, etc. Have any of you had the opportunity to actually go on location for any of the projects you've had to do historically wise?
This is one thing that I've always wanted to do. I know the Colonel Waterhouse did, and I've one of the things I've always wanted to do is down at Guantanamo Bay when John Quick was doing the signaling of the USS Dolphin, and he was being fired upon. Anyway, it's a wonderful scene. You've seen it depicted in different things. I've even seen some three-dimensional little dioramas of that sort of thing. But to go to see the scene, supposedly those who have been on site still say that there are piles of expended brass from the machine gun, the potato digger machine guns that were being used, and they're still there on the battlefield. That would be wonderful as an artist, because I could see exactly where he was and where they were, and actually get a decent picture from that scene. So that would take all the guesswork away, and you could depict it dramatically but realistically, accurately. But no, I've not yet been to. I'd love to go to like Iwo Jima and that sort of thing as well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Do you have like an official hit list that you want to?
Well, I do have an illustration list that
Yeah.
we've developed that will mainly my job right now is for historical illustrations is to depict Vietnam to current day.
where Waterhouse
Colonel,
left
yes,
off.
where
yeah.
Colonel Waterhouse left
Okay.
off. So, but since some of that stuff is older, I'd like to dip back into some of the history that's may or may not have been covered. But to go there would be wonderful.
Yeah, I've always been wrapped up in like current day, and I mean, especially because I only just got out a year ago, that all my focus was what was happening in that moment, and I've never really thought much about like going back into the gaps of the collection, because that's pretty much what Kris covers as the artist in residence, and then all the other artists generally are supposed to deploy and cover the current events. Is how it's set up, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's nothing stopping you from doing a wonderful historical
There's
piece.
nothing stopping
Right.
me. Yeah, I love to travel. I mean, a big thing for me and as a freelance artist is, in a civilian veteran, is capturing stories still, just not Marine Corps stories necessarily. So I'll always be traveling, and if they align, that'd be great.
Good thing.
All right. Well, as we're winding down here, you do freelance art.
I do,
Where can
yes.
people find?
You can find me online under the name Inkstick Art. All platforms, pretty easy.
Pretty easy.
She's
Kris?
really good with the social media stuff.
Yeah.
I've got the social media down.
She's got followers.
That's why I help run our social
Right,
media.
that's why we hired you. That's just
Yeah,
you're good
yeah.
at. You're so good at it.
Kris, do you have anything out there? Or?
I've got an old blog I don't use as much as I should. I'm on Facebook.
Yeah.
So because Facebook sort of devoured everything else, that sort of killed the blogosphere, so to
Mhm.
speak.
And we'll post Kris's work. We have a Marine Corps Combat Art program, Instagram, USMC Combat Art, and then we have a Facebook group where Kris will post all of
She
his work
posts
as
every day,
well.
pretty much. Yeah.
You do
Yeah.
too,
Yeah.
like
Well,
your
yeah,
process shots and
yeah.
stuff like that.
Is there a place for anyone to get prints or anything from for the Marine Corps art or historical?
Yes,
Or?
Marine Corps Museum request a print. You can go on there,
Yeah, it's all
And
one word, requestaprint.com.
requestaprint.com, Marine Corps Museum. Yep, and then all the work that's up online, you can search any war, any artist, and the work will come up.
Yeah,
and you can
so
print
like
it.
when you get on the homepage, it'll show like Navy collection, Marine Corps collection, etc. Don't mind all those other ones. Go to the Marine Corps collection. Right?
Of course.
Although I've got some of the stuff in the Navy you might want to check out too. But and then you'll click on the tab, and then it can show. Then you can search by artist or by, like she says, by battle or by campaign and that sort of thing.
So if any of our listeners are looking for Christmas or birthday presents, you know exactly where to go.
Yes.
Help
Hey.
plug our interviewees.
Yeah, reach out a few months before Christmas because it does get pretty busy. Those last minute
Starts that
gifts.
shopping in July.
There's always next year.
It's always next. That's right. There's no, reach out now for next year.
Okay. Any commissioning type work? Or you just
I do commission work. I mean, I love posting online and talking with younger viewers and helping them with their art and all of that. But I do commission work as well, and animation, storyboarding, kind of all over the place.
All right. Well, there is a bit of a tradition on the podcast where the final question, and this is going to have to go both ways, is what was your best day in the Corps? So we can any kind of Marine Corps art. So even when you were not in the Corps, you can also throw that in there for this one. But best day in the Corps, Kris, you deferred the first question when we started. So
No. Trying to think what my best day in the Corps was.
If I was still in the Marine Corps, I'd be my best day hasn't happened yet, but I'm not in.
Every day is a great day.
You can always go
Every
back,
day.
though, apparently.
I can always go back.
Right.
I'm not 38 yet, so
Yeah,
I
really,
got some
exactly.
time.
I guess maybe when I finally made staff sergeant.
That was,
Maybe that was a pretty good. We'll see. Long story short, I was in originally. I made sergeant in 1990. I got out of the Marine Corps in 90. Well, in the IRR in 94. Got out in 96. Re-enlisted in 2006 as a sergeant, and finally in 2011 I made staff sergeant. So finally,
Gosh,
Yeah.
20 years later or whatever it was.
that's just like overnight, man. That was
Right. Right. No problem.
There's so many good
That's
days.
like old school.
So you've never had asked, like, why is there this gap in your resume between sergeant and staff sergeant?
What's this
Well, it's just
military
a couple decades.
It's okay. It's okay.
Did you have like
Don't
an
look
extra
too
big
hard on
cake that day? Like,
We don't
No,
talk
it's just
about that
happy.
gap.
I'm just happy to pin on.
Elise, do you have a best day?
There's so many good moments that happened in my Marine Corps career, and I could always say, like, any time that I got to share stories of Marines and give it to, like, the family members, especially Marines that were killed in action, or like being able to do memorial portraits, for me, it always made it like the best moments.
That's a very nice answer.
Thank
And
you.
it's true.
And then also graduating boot camp, was pretty good.
That's right.
I was in boot
Just
camp for
becoming
6
one.
months. yeah. But yeah, anytime there was like something bigger than like just your day-to-day task, and being able to
Okay.
support and help do art.
All right, guys. Well, it has been great having you. We'd love to have you back sometime. Elise, I think you said you had some travel up in your future, but
All the time.
all the time.
Going to stay on a boat tonight.
But
so.
yeah, aside from the gauntlet you had to run to get here, the museum's right there. So, like, if
Hey,
you're
we have an
ever-
open door policy too at our studio, so come
Yeah,
on, say
please
hi
do
if
come
you're
by
in
the
the area.
museum.
All right.
Awesome.
Sounds good. So, on behalf of everybody here, we're really glad you guys came. Had a great conversation. We got your plugs in. William got his history questions in. Vic got to ask about how art and writing compares. Like, this was a good day. So, just quick disclaimer, everything we've said today is our own opinion and doesn't reflect the Marine Corps Association, the Marine Corps, the museum, or anything like that. It's all us. So, without any further ado, thank you guys, and we'll catch everybody on the flip.